So Down and Out in Paris and London is a chapter. It's actually a novel. The novel is called Down and Out in Paris and London, which talks about the writer's experience in these two cities of Paris and London. And this chapter, that is chapter 23, is called Roucolle the Miser, which has been prescribed in our course. So this talks about Roucolle the Miser. We don't get to see him, we get to know about him through the narration given by the writer's friend called Charlie. So it's Charlie who is narrating the story of this man who was very, very miserly. He was so miserly that you can see the description of the way he lived his life. He would go to the fresh food market in Paris, and then he would pick up all the rotten leftover vegetables. He ate cat's meat. I mean, this is not to take everything literally, but that was the extent to which he would go to save money. And finally, what happened was a Jew fooled him, a Jew, as in a Jewish person. And what he did was he said there is this secret scheme of smuggling some cocaine into England. So if you invest some money into the scheme, you will get a huge return. So he was really greedy for more money. So he invested quite a big amount. Finally, he comes to know that he has been cheated by the Jew. So he lost all that investment and he dies a heartbroken man. So this shows the irony of human greed. That is, you want to have more and more, and ultimately, what is the price you pay for it? You pay it with your own life. So when you're not around to enjoy your wealth and your earnings, what good it is to you? That's a question. So this can be seen as a very close analysis, a close psychological analysis of a human being, a human person who is given to this kind of a behavior, someone who is very, very greedy for material wealth and money. All right, so it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek story, and the whole thing is a narration as spoken by George Orwell. So the novelist, the narrator is speaking to us, and we will be acquainted with Roucolle the Miser through his eyes, and the story is told to him by his friend Charlie. So one of you kindly read. Let's have someone quick, clear, and loud.
Yes, can I?
Yes, please.
As soon as I left the Aubrey de Jehan Cotard, I went to bed and slept the clock round all about 1 hour, all but 1 hour. Then I washed my teeth for the first time in a fortnight, bathed and had my hair cut and got my clothes out of pawn. I had 2 glorious days of laughing. I even went in my best suit to the Aubrey, leant against the bar, and spent 5 francs on a bottle of English beer. It is a curious sensation being a customer where you have been a slave's slave. Boris was sorry that I had left the restaurant just at the moment when we were anxious and there was a chance of making money. I have heard from him since, and he tells me that he is making 100 francs a day and has set up a girl whose dress serious. Miss, can you spell that word?
Très serious means somebody
Uh,
who's serious in a relationship.
dress serious and never smells of garlic. I spent a day wandering about our quarter, saying goodbye to everyone. It was on this day that Charlie told me about the death of old Roucolle the Miser, who had once lived in the quarter. Very likely, Charlie was lying as usual, but it was a good story.
Okay, so
Ros-
we have an introduction to what the writer was doing in the city of Paris. So we come to know that he was working in this hotel we don't know, as a waiter or whatever. He was a worker at this hotel called Auberge de Jahan Cotard. So he went there. So he left that place. So he left that job, and then what did he do? He went back to his room wherever. Then he washed his teeth for the first time in a fortnight. So from this we can understand that he was living a terrible life in the hotel. Maybe he did not have time even for himself. So he had bath and cut his hair and got his clothes out of pawn. From this we understand that his clothes were all pawned. Pawn as in you give things and you get money out of it, right? Panayam Vekel, that is pawning. So he got all those things out, and then for 2 days he roamed around. So now he was free from the job and he was enjoying himself, and he wore his best clothes and went back to the same hotel to have a drink. So he spent 5 francs. Francs is the currency of France. So he spent 5 francs on a bottle of English beer. And then he says it was quite curious and strange to be a customer at the very place that you used to work before. And there he met his friend who was his fellow worker, and his name is Boris. So Boris, he said, you should not have left now. And he was very sorry that the writer left that particular job. Why? Because there were lances as in workers who are paid on an hourly basis. So they used to be paid just like on the hourly basis, and now they were making good money. That is, the wages had been increased. So he's telling the writer that you made the wrong decision of leaving the job when things were looking up. That his salary had improved. Then he's speaking about his own life, that he was making 100 francs a day, which is not bad. And then he has set up a girl who is very serious about the relationship. So for Boris, life is more or less well settled. That is, he's got good wages every day, good money. And then he has found a good girlfriend who's really serious about the relationship, and she doesn't smell of garlic. That is somebody who's very attractive, and unlike maybe someone whom he had dated before, who used to smell of garlic. So that day, what did he do? The writer, he went around the quarter where they used to stay, and he went there to say goodbye to everyone. So he's leaving Paris and going to London. So that's the background. So he's saying goodbye to everyone in that old quarters in Paris where he used to stay. So when he went there, he met his friend Charlie. So Charlie told him about the death of this person called Roucolle the Miser. So look at the way he's called. He's called Roucolle the Miser, not just Roucolle, because he had a reputation for his miserliness. So everyone called him Roucolle the Miser. So about the death of Roucolle the Miser, and he used to live in the same quarter once upon a time. So now again we have another line which says that Charlie, maybe he was lying as usual. So from this we understand that Charlie was in the habit of lying and telling all kinds of tall tales, all imaginary stories. But then this was a very good story. So now he's going to tell us what this story is all about. So kindly make it quick because we want to finish this in an hour's time. Do you have any class after this? Botany, maths, English? Yes. So we need to finish this. Quick, quick.
Rockall died age 74 a year or two before I went to Paris, but the people in the quarter still talked of him while I was there. He never equaled. Miss, excuse me, please. I'll be.
Okay. Can someone else take up from there?
Roucolle died aged 74 a year or two before I went to Paris. But the people in the quarter still talked of him while I was there. He never equaled Daniel Dancer or anyone of that kind. But he was an interesting character. He went to Les Hales every morning to pick up damaged vegetables, ate cat's meat and wore newspaper instead of underclothes, and used the wainscoting of his room for firewood, and made himself a pair of trousers out of a sack. All this with 500,000 francs invested. I should like very much to have known him. Like many misers, Urkel came to a bad end through putting his money into a wildcat scheme. One day Jew appeared in the quarter, an alert, businesslike young chap who had a first-rate plan for smuggling cocaine into England. It is easy enough, of course, to buy cocaine in Paris, and the smuggling would be quite simple in itself, only there is always some spy who betrays the plan to the customs or the police. It is said that this is often done by the very people who sell the cocaine because the smuggling trade is in the hands of a large company who do not want competition. The Jew, however, swore that there was no danger. He knew a way of getting cocaine direct from Vienna, not through the usual channels, and there would be no blackmail to pay. He had got into touch with Roucolle through a young Paul, a student at the Sorbonne, who was going to put 4,000 francs into the scheme if Roucolle would put 6,000. For this, they could buy 10 pounds of cocaine, which would be worth a small fortune in England. The Pole and the Jew had a tremendous struggle to get the money from between all Roucolle's clothes. 6,000 francs was not much, he had more than that soon in the mattress in his room. But it was agony for him to part with the sou. The Pole and the Jew were at him for weeks on end, explaining, bullying, coaxing, arguing, going down on their knees and imploring him to produce the money. The old man was half frantic between greed and fear. His bowels yearned at the thought of getting perhaps 50,000 francs profit, and yet he could not bring himself to risk the money. He used to sit in the corner with his head in the hands, groaning and sometimes yelling out in agony, and often he would kneel down, he was very pious, and pray for strength, but still he couldn't do it. But at last, more from exhaustion than anything else, he gave in quite suddenly. He slipped upon the mattress where his money was concealed and handed over 6,000 francs to the Jew.
All right. So what do we see that this man died when he was 74, and then he was filthy rich. He was very, very rich, but then he was very stingy. And even today, people spoke about him and what happened to him. So we come, and then there is this reference to Daniel Dancer. He is again a very famous character who is very famous for his miserliness. But then, do this man, Roucolle, he did not equal Daniel Dancer. So there are people even worse than Roucolle. So that's the thing we get out of here. So he was a very interesting character. So he went to this market to pick up all damaged vegetables. He ate cat's meat. He wore newspaper as his underclothes, and he used the wooden paneling of his own room for firewood. He wouldn't use money to buy firewood. He made clothes out of a sack, and at the same time he had 500,000 francs invested, so he had plenty of money. So investment itself was 500,000, so he would have had other money also in his hand. So the writer is saying I should have very much I should like very much to have known him. So to know this kind of a character would have been really fun. So now he came to a bad end. That is, the end of his life was pretty tragic. Why? Because he put his money into a wild cat scheme, as in a wild what you call a wild goose chase kind of a scheme, which no person in their right mind would do. But he was persuaded into putting his money into a scheme which led to his death. So what happened? This was done by a Jew, this young business-like young Jew. So now this reference to a character of a Jew has come in for a lot of criticism by many other critics, because Jews in literature are always seen as money lenders and people who cheat, which actually is not the truth. For instance, you have Shylock, Shakespeare's Shylock, who is a very famous Jewish character, but then painted in all negative light. And there has been a lot of criticism against this kind of a portrayal of Jews in literature. So, like, if you don't get into all that, you can just try and enjoy this just as a story without looking into the anti-Semitic undertone to the story. So now, what is the plan? There's this plan to smuggle cocaine into England. So it was quite easy. It could have been done because cocaine was quite freely available, or it was quite openly available in Paris. Even smuggling would have been easy. But then, what's the problem? There would have been some spy or the other who belonged to the customs or the police, and he would inform, and the person would get caught. And then Why was this done? Why were they spying there, which made it very difficult for people to smuggle cocaine? Was that there was a large combine, as in a large cartel, large cartel, as in a large union of underworld players who were into smuggling. So they had their men all around, and they did not want outsiders getting into the business of cocaine smuggling. So the Jew, what did he say? That there's no danger, nobody will catch you, and he knew how to get cocaine directly from Vienna, and then there wouldn't be anybody to blackmail in between, so it would be a smooth going. And then he got in touch with Roucolle through a young Polish student, a young Pole, as in a young Pole, someone from Poland. He was a student at the University of Sorbonne in France. So this student, young chap again, he was going to put 4,000 francs into the scheme, and Roucolle had to put 6,000. So together they needed 10,000 to buy 10 pounds of cocaine. And then this cocaine, if sold in England, would be worth a fortune. So they'll be able to make a huge margin of profit. So that was the idea. So now the Pole and the Jew, they tried to convince this old man, and to get money out of this old man was so difficult. It's like, he was clawing at his money. So 6,000 francs was not much for this man. He was already a millionaire. So they went to him for weeks on end, explaining, bullying, coaxing, arguing, begging, pleading, asking him to put the money. An old man, on one hand, he was so greedy and he would have jumped at the offer, but on the other hand, he was scared of parting with the money. So he was torn between the two. That is, to be or not to be. That is, whether to put the money in the scheme or not to. And what would he do? He was under a lot of strain himself. Remember, he was an old man. So he did not know exactly what to do, whether he could trust in this, whether he could believe in this. So what would he do? He would sit in a corner, he would be putting his head in his hand, moaning, groaning, yelling out. He was in a lot of agony and pain, not knowing, and not being able to decide on what to do. He would kneel down and pray for strength. So this is a very funny sketch of this man struggling with his inner demons, but still he couldn't do it. So at last, what happened? He was so tired from this whole drama, that moaning, groaning, and praying, everything. He was tired and he was so spent that finally he decided that he will give the money. And where did he get the money from? So even his mattresses are stuffed with cash. So he slit open the mattress and then he handed over 6,000 francs to the Jew. So now let's see what happens in the story.
The Jew delivered the cocaine the same day and promptly vanished. And meanwhile, as was not surprising after the fuss Roucolle had made, the affair had been noised all over the Kyoto. The very next morning, the hotel was raided and searched by the police. Roucolle and Paul were in agonies. The police were downstairs, working their way up and searched every room in town. And thereafter, the great packet of cocaine on the table, with no place to hide it and no chance of escaping down the stairs. The pole was for throwing the stuff out of the window, but Roucolle would not hear of it. Charlie told me that he had been present at the scene. He said that when they tried to take the packet from Roucolle, he clasped it to his breast and struggled like a madman. Although he was 74 years, although he was 74 years old, he was wild with fright, but he would go to prison rather than throw his money away. At last, when the police were searching only for the floor below, somebody had an idea. A man on Rocol's floor had a dozen tins of face powder, which he was selling on commission. It was suggested that the cocaine would be put into the tins and passed off as face powder. The powder was hastily thrown out of the window and cocaine substituted, and the tins were put openly on Rocol's table as though there were nothing to conceal. A few minutes later, the police came to search Rocol's room. They tapped the walls and looked up the chimney and turned out the drawers and examined the floorboards. And then, just as they were about to give it up, having found nothing, The inspector noticed the tins on the table. Tins, he said. Have a look at those tins. I hadn't noticed them. What is in them? What what's in them? Face powder, said the Poles as calmly as he could manage. But at the same instant, Roucolle let out a loud groaning noise from alarm, and the police became suspicious immediately. They opened one of the tins and tipped out the contents. And after smelling it, the inspector said that he believed it was cocaine. Roucolle and Paul began swearing on the names of the saints that it was only face powder. But it was no use. The more they protested, the more suspicious the police became. The two men were arrested and led off to the police station, followed by half the Kyoto. At the station, Rocco, at the station, Roucolle and Paul were interrogated by the commissioner, while a tin of the cocaine was sent away to be analyzed. Charlie said that the scene Roucolle made was beyond description. He wept, prayed, made contradictory statements, and denounced the Pole all at once, so loud that he could so loud that he could hear half a street away. The policeman almost burst with laughing at him. After an hour, a police came back with a tin of cocaine and a note from the analyst. He was laughing. "This is not cocaine, monsieur," he said. "What? Not cocaine?" said the commissioner. "Maislers, what is it then? What is it then?" "It is face powder." Roucolle and the police and the Pole were released at once, entirely exonerated but very angry. The Jew had double crossed them. Afterwards, when the excitement was over, it turned out that he had played the same trick on the two other people in the Kyoto. The Pole was glad enough to escape, even though he had lost his 4,000 francs. But poor old Roucolle was utterly broken down. He took his bed at once, and all that day and half the night they could hear him thrashing about, mumbling, and sometimes yelling out at the top of his voice, 6,000 francs. Nom de Jesus Christ, 6,000 francs. 3 days later, he had some kind of stroke, and in a fortnight, he was dead of broken heart, Charlie said.
Okay, so now the scheme was laid out and cocaine was to be given to them. So they got 10 grams of cocaine, and what happened? It was delivered the same day. That is after that 10,000 francs were given to the Jew. So now, after all that noise that was made by this old man, everybody in the quarter, that is in that flat, that particular area, everybody knew what was happening. So somebody must have called the police and informed. So the very next morning, the hotel was raided and searched by the police. So now Roucolle and Paul, they were in a lot of agony. They were really tensed. Why? Because police were downstairs and they were climbing and coming up. And then there was this great packet of cocaine lying on the table, and they didn't know where to hide it, and they could not now escape through the stairs because the police were climbing upstairs. So it's like that classic filmy scene. So they have no way to escape. The thing is lying there. So what to do? So another Pole, that student, he said, let's throw it out of the window. But Roucolle, he would not allow that, because that would be like throwing the money out, right? 10,000 francs. And what if somebody takes and leaves? So he was taking that, and he was holding it close to his breast. He was clasping it, and he was struggling like a mad man, refusing to part with the packet of cocaine. He was so scared, but then he would rather go to prison than throw the money away. So even at the face of being arrested, he's clinging on to that wealth, clinging on. Now here cocaine is wealth, because by giving, I mean, they had already invested this much and they hope to make a fortune by selling that. So finally, what happened when the police was searching and coming their way up, when they were downstairs, somebody got an idea that there was another person in the same building who was into powder business. So he had tins and tins of face powder. and he was selling it on commission. So what was suggested was that they could put the cocaine in one of those boxes and they could kind of throw away the powder. So when the police would ask, they would think that this is in the powder tin, it is actually powder and not cocaine. So they substituted it and they put it openly on Roucolle's table, because you don't conceal a powder, right? You just keep it lying anywhere. So they did like that, and after a few minutes, the police reached Roucolle's room. So now, what did they do? They tapped the walls, they looked around the chimney, they turned out the drawers, examined the floorboards, and then just they were about to leave. What happened? The inspector noticed the tins on the table. So they said, the policeman said, tins is hold. That is, wait, let's have a look at the tins. I hadn't noticed it earlier. So what is in them? So now Paul is saying face powder. He's trying to be as calm as possible. Now this is a very tense situation, and people, they had to lie, and it was quite difficult. So he is trying to be very calm. But then what happened to the old man? He could not stay calm. We have already understood his character, right? He was all the time tensed and distraught and worried, making a lot of noise, hue and cry. So what happened? Recall, he let out a loud groaning noise because he was alarmed, and immediately the police suspected that there's something fishy about this tin. So they opened one of the tins and tipped out the content, and they smelled it and they believed it was cocaine. So now both of them, they started swearing that it is not cocaine, it's only face powder. But then the more they protested, the more suspicious they became. So finally they arrested these two, and they were taken to the police station. So now when they were taken to the police station, followed by half the quarter. So this is like a procession. You can imagine, it's kind of a funny scene. So now at the police station, what happened? Interrogation happened. The commissaire, that is the police officer superior, he was there, and he was interrogated, and then the tin was sent away for forensic analysis. So Charlie, he said he was there at that scene. So what does he say? That Roucault created a scene there. He was weeping, crying, moaning, making contradictory statements, and at times he would say that Paul is behind all this. I didn't do anything, and he was, swearing. He's creating a ruckus there, creating a scene, and everything was so loud that you could hear him half a street away. So the whole thing was so funny that even the serious policemen, they burst out laughing. So now after half an hour, another policeman came back with the analysis report. And the report said that it is not cocaine. It's not cocaine, monsieur. Monsieur is Mr. What is it? It is face powder. So now both of them were freed from the jail because they couldn't find any cocaine on their person. So now that they were released, they were exonerated as in made free of guilt. But then they were very, very angry. Now what had happened? This Jew had double crossed them. He had cheated them. He had taken the money, and in turn he had given them nothing but face powder. So after all this excitement was over, it was understood that the same Jew had cheated other people, two other people in the quarter in that particular area. So the Pole, he was quite happy. At least they escaped from the police station. There was no further cases, and also he was relieved at that. Though he lost 4,000 francs. But then look at our dear old Roucault. He was utterly broken, and he fell ill, and then all day and half the night, he was mumbling, moaning and groaning. He had become frantic, thrashing about and then yelling out. And what was he yelling out? 6,000 francs, nom de Jesus Christ, that is in the name of Jesus Christ, just losing 6,000 francs like that. And you can imagine the kind of life that he used to live in order to save money. That is, you cannot call it cost cutting. It was like, scrimping like anything, not spending a sou on anything. That is the least of the um, what do you call them, monetary, the money required for even leading a decent life. So he was not willing to spend even for that. And here now what has happened? 6,000 gone at a blink, just like that, wiped out. But then for a millionaire, this should not have mattered. But for this man, this miser, this was like too much. He could not take it. So 3 days later, what happened? The shock was so much that he suffered some kind of a stroke, and in a fortnight, he was dead. And how did he die? Of a broken heart. So all this was narrated by Charlie to the writer. So this becomes a classic story, a story about human greed, to what extent people can go to fulfill their greed. And when it comes to these kind of wild schemes, wildcat schemes, these kind of people, they become very gullible. They fall prey to it. People like you and me would think twice. But then these kind of people, they simply jump into it because of that greed to make more money, to get more returns. So maybe we can say that, serves him right. After all the drama that he had done, and how he had refused to part with even a single sou from his money. So there's so much money all around him, but even then he did not give it to anyone, did not use it on himself, and finally what happened? He died. And dead people don't carry cash or money with them, right, when they go. So that was the end of this very interesting miser Roucolle.